Very much, everybody. Yes, thank you very much, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. Relatively short period of time to get to speak to each other on a very interesting topic today. But before we do that, maybe it's just good to start on some house rules that we probably would want to look at before we start the webinar. So there will be a couple of people who will be with us. So please kindly keep your microphone and video disabled to lessen the load on the bandwidth and preserve the quality of the exchanges that we're getting. You know, not everybody lives in a place where there's too much bandwidth. So, and once we get to the questions and concerns, uh, you can please leave them in the chat bar, and we'll try to incorporate them into the conversation afterwards. And there's no need to record the webinar. APEA will be uploading and forwarding these to you later on. So shouldn't be a problem. So don't worry too much about taking notes. And there will be a video of everything that we discuss. So, yeah. And maybe on that note, maybe I'll pass it over to Ritu for a little bit more of a welcome from our part.
Okay, thanks a lot, Titos. Hello, everyone. Salam and Namaste. On behalf of Asia Pacific Evaluation Association, a warm welcome to each one of you. I work with Global Fund for Children, and I'm also the core group member of APEA's action group. It's called Community Owns MEL and Research. And this community of practice, we have nearly 300 members, and you're welcome to join us. The topic of today's webinar is a very important one. It focuses on relationships, and you'll think like, what's the connection between relationships and evaluation or research? But we all, as professionals, we enter communities, we listen to their stories, they share their experiences, and this places a lot of responsibility on us. For me, one of the very important questions beyond that, what data did we collect, or is how did people, especially from the communities, how did they experience it? And also to examine my own positionality as an evaluation professional and the power which I can bring. And also there is another concern which I want to raise, because in our community of practice we've had discussions and we've had online consultations, and we've heard about people and the community especially saying that there's a declining trust in outsiders and in institutions and other development professionals. And communities say we've participated in countless in surveys or studies, but we've answered all your questions, but did anything change? And did anything change, especially those who are facing marginalization? So therefore, we need to challenge the way we think about our role, and did we build trust? Because we had an entire webinar on trust, or we are just extracting information, and what about the process itself of evaluation? So keeping all this context in mind, I really want you all to think about why relationships matter, and should we look beyond the tools and the frameworks we always focus on. So, and before I hand it back to Titos, I just want to say how excited I am that Bob and Titos are today here with us. They have mentored me in many ways, and they've always highlighted the importance of relationships and human connections in our work. And so I'm so thankful that they are there, because they don't really do many webinars. And by saying that, I'm also looking forward to learning from you all, and I really hope that we can get to harness the collective wisdom which lies in this online Zoom room. So thanks a lot. Huh? Please share. Over to you, Titos.
Thank you very much, Ritu. I think that's a good sort of sum up of a little bit of the challenging questions. And I just realized I have been remiss at first introducing myself. So my name is Titos. Carlitos is a name that only my mother calls me, but that's okay. You can also call me Carlitos if you feel like it. But my name is Titos, and I've been a student and practitioner of development for more than 30, almost 40 years. And I can just say it's been an interesting journey. But one thing that always challenges us, no? One thing that always question about uh, uh, things when we're doing development work, especially on learning and evaluation, is are we doing the right thing? Are we measuring the right thing? And this is what Ritu was sort of harking on a little bit in the introduction. And I can't help but saying that sort of famous misquote of Einstein that is not said by him, right? So it was actually a sociologist named Mr. William Cameron who said that actually not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted actually counts. So I think the misquote just says something about us as human beings tending to listen to so-called quote unquote experts. And this is probably something for another a discussion, but it's actually core to what we're discussing today. Yeah. Today we'll talk about something that lies at the heart of practice and evaluation, the practice of evaluation and learning. We'll talk about uh, some of the things that are the most important, how yet the most challenging to evaluate and measure. And these are, like what Ritu said, relationships and actual transformational change. Very difficult to measure these things. We'll try to talk about how we need to rethink the purpose, the values, and the practice behind evaluation and learning. And we'll talk about possibilities of changing mindsets that will actually allow us to gain insight into the what and the who transformational change should really be giving importance to. And of course, what tools we can help to forward us in our own practice. And Ritu already mentioned it as well, but we're very lucky to have a very distinguished academic and development practitioner who has loads of wisdom for today. He describes himself as many things, and if you look at his CV and resume, he's a continuing student and learner and a mentor to many. It brings many decades of experience and reflection to the table. Today, he'll talk about the challenges of making evaluation practice relevant or making it continue to be relevant in times of in our crazy times, chaos and complexity. He'll try to look into how we need to change mindsets and practices so that we're actually measuring things and changes that actually matter, and how we should put at the center and all of these the importance of, as is the title, relationships as drivers and foundations for transformational change. Uh, it's interesting because in if you look at a lot, if you look at his CV, something that probably won't appear is that Bob loves to cook. Yeah, and in this talk that we're wanting to have, I want to invite Bob, the chef, not the cook who only religiously follows recipes, but one that is able to create and adapt new combinations and tastes based on the context and people around the table. So hopefully, we all leave with some insight on how we ourselves can become more creative chefs, not cooks, and host spaces for transformative evaluation practice. So, with that, without further ado, I'd like to hand on over to Bob.
Many thanks, Titos. Let me put it all initially in a historical context. When I first learnt that there was a thing called evaluation. It was actually called evaluation research. And the notion was that it was supposed to follow the behaviours of what were thought of as good research at the time. And then, because that didn't always work in evaluation settings, it became known as just evaluation. And I think I can see an upturn in the number of people calling their evaluation participatory evaluation and giving much more attention to the relationship side of it. And we'll have a look into the future to the extent that we can, because part of the context for what I wish to say this evening, well, it's this evening here where I am, today, if you like, is that most of the present indications about the likely future are that it will be even more turbulent than the present. And so the topic for the talk is really about how to maintain evaluation's relevance as if the future does become even more turbulent than the present is. Titos, thanks for the comments about my background. I've done some evaluation, but I don't think of myself as an evaluator. And so that means that that gives a lot of freedom to everybody else who's here, because it means that you can always, if you wish, dismiss what I say and think, well, he's not an evaluator, he wouldn't really know. In point of fact, I do a lot of evaluation, but as part of action research, which is the research methodology that I mostly use, because it's about understanding the situation and working out how to change it with the people involved as it proceeds. And so it's a step-by-step cyclic process with a little bit of evaluation within each cycle. And I have done some evaluation, but all of that, almost without exception, was formative evaluation. It wasn't about saying how good did we do in the past. It was about saying how can we set ourselves up to keep on improving into the future. And that's the kind of attitude I'll try to bring to our work together this evening. You might find it useful, as you listen to what I have to say, to have in the back of your mind some evaluation project, either that you've done that was already trying to deal with a fairly turbulent situation, or that you expect to come up in the near future. And with that case study in the back of your mind, you can keep asking yourself, is what Bob's saying relevant to my case study? And if the answer is yes, but you're not quite sure how to use it, that might suggest a question that you might put in the chat, which Titos will take us through later. If you think about the current situation, take a moment to think about what trajectory do you think we're on? What do you think has been going on for each of us and for the places where we work and for the world that we're in, and particularly in the last 40 years? From my perspective, that's been a bit of a wrong turn, but not everyone would agree with that. And part of the context is also that I'm going to work on the assumption that all of us are in the change business. We're about helping people do better the things that they do. And to pick up Titos's comment about let's be chefs, not cooks. In other words, our approach to change will be not following processed recipes religiously, but rather trying to tailor them on the run if necessary to fit the situation we find ourselves in and the people we find ourselves working with. The core of what I have to say I've drawn from the work of Chris Argyris. That's Argyris, for those not familiar with his work. It seems to me that it is, firstly, extremely valuable, and I'll leave it to you to judge whether that's true for your situation too. And I think it's also undervalued. And I think there are reasons for that, and I probably won't go into them. but partly because it's very hard to use his work without generating defensiveness and denial on the part of the people on the receiving end. And that's countercultural in some ways, and maybe that explains what happens. There was a question that drove most of Argyris's work, and it was, why do some attempts to improve a situation actually make it worse? Or as I like to frame that, sometimes a relationship, for example, or a team or a group or an organization or community find themselves in a downward spiral. And so they set aside some time or hire a consultant or a facilitator or evaluator to help them turn the downward spiral upward. And sometimes that just quickens the downward movement and makes it even worse. And that was the question that drove Argyris in the 50 or so years of his research and practice. And what I'll do now is share screen so that, let me first of all make sure that I do have the slide deck ready to go. Yes, I do. So you should now see me dragging an unused text file down off that screen. And then when I start up the slideshow, a slide should appear on your screen with nothing except maintaining evaluation's relevance in the bottom right corner.
Yes, it's visible.
And let's begin by looking at self-fulfilling prophecies, because as we'll see, when there's a downward spiral, it's because negative self-fulfilling prophecies have been formed. And at the heart of that, often without being fully aware of it, we form assumptions about other people, the people we're working with, particularly about their motives. And we treat our assumptions as if they're factual. And then without checking their accuracy, we act on them. And other people see our actions and they form assumptions about our motives and they act on them. And that's where the cycle comes from. And so if you take a moment to look at that diagram, where people's untested assumptions about each other lead to actions which lead to untested assumptions on the part of the other person. And that's where the cycle comes from. And it can be a downward cycle or an upward cycle. And our attention this evening is how can we turn a downward cycle into an upward cycle. One of the points that Argyris made is that we have two theories of action. His whole approach was called a theory of action approach. We tell ourselves and others how we behave, and we think that in doing that we follow our values closely, that we are caring and honest and concerned for others and can be trusted and all of that. And then our theory in use, in Argyris's terminology, other people notice the recurring patterns of our behaviour and they make assumptions about our values and our motives and things like that from what they observe. And often there's a gap between the two. And here's the key point that I want to make, and that I think has particular relevance for the future. Our theory in use is often less complementary of us than our espoused theory is. And when we become stressed or embarrassed, the gap between the two can widen. We now know from neuropsychological research is that what happens is that the old brain at the top of our spinal cord here can take over control of our brain if it thinks we're in any peril. And if necessary, it will take control of our actions to do that. And so when we're stressed or embarrassed, we lose the ability to notice how we're behaving. And that's how a gap can open up. So it's when we're stressed or embarrassed that the issue is most. I'll just read that out for those of you that aren't showing the screen. This is a quote from Argyris in his book he wrote with Don Shern in 1974 called Theory and Practice. Although we say we value openness, honesty, integrity, respect, and caring, we act in ways that undercut those values, not just once in a while on very rare occasions, but regularly and routinely whenever we face threatening or otherwise difficult situations. And you can probably imagine that people would rather not hear that about themselves. And maybe that's why Argyris's work is so undervalued. So to sum that up, when people are stressed or embarrassed, driven by their theory and use, they try to control the process and the outcome. They do whatever they can to make sure that they're the winner of whatever the outcome is, and they either behave rationally or do their best to appear to behaving in that way. So to sum up where we've come so far, when people are stressed or embarrassed, their behaviour varies from what they espouse, and they're not aware of it. Other people notice, of course, but it's almost as if there's a taboo against saying it, because they don't say anything. Argyris called it the cover-up of the cover-up. First of all, we cover it up from ourselves, and then the people observing us also cover it up by not mentioning anything about what they observe. Now, here's the point about keeping evaluation relevant. If the world does become more turbulent and predictable, as most futurists say it is and is likely to become, I'd expect stress and embarrassment to increase. And that means that the dynamics I've been talking about are likely to increase even further. So with that as background, let me introduce you to a few tools, and you may find some of these you can fit into the work that you do generally, including your work as evaluators. Two of the tools come from Chris Argyris and are written up. I used to recommend Theory and Practice, the book I mentioned earlier, to people, and about half of them would say, "Why did you mention such an unreadable book to me?" But his work becomes more readable as he proceeded, and so his later work is much more readable than his very early work. The other thing worth mentioning is that his own approach to work changed in 1974 or just before, and I think it was the effect of working with Don Shern, because Don Shern's work trajectory changed at that time too. And they didn't follow the same directory from that point on, but each of them were clearly changed by their work with each other. I didn't ever meet Argyris, not even on screen. Don Shern came to Australia and ran a couple of workshops when I was at Southern Cross University, and I attended them, and he was a lovely person. And I met some of his family, and they were lovely people too. So maybe that goes together, lovely people and lovely families. I think it's true of my family, or at least I'd like to think so. So, some tools. I'll skip through this fairly quickly because I want to leave as much time for questions as I can. That's called the ladder of inference, if you can see it on your screen. We're immersed in far more information than we can possibly pay attention to. And our subconscious mind takes in much of it, but even our unconscious mind doesn't take it all in. We make a selection from the flood of data. And it's usually a biased selection depending on our expectations. I remember seeing some early sketches of kangaroos by some of the earliest European visitors to Australian shores. And they drew a kangaroo as if it was a dog with extended hind legs. In other words, when they saw a kangaroo, they saw a dog with extended hind legs. And to my eye, what they drew didn't look much like a kangaroo at all. And from that biased selection, we perceive it as something. For me, I suspect for most people, steps 1 and 2 happen at the same time. I'm not aware of the particular data of the specific sounds I hear or the specific smells I smell or so on. I attribute it as indicating something. And then at step 3, and this is important, I attach some meaning to it. And in the light of that meaning, subject to all of my biases and assumptions and expectations, I decide what action to take and I act. And so you can see how that can sit behind what I said before about downward and upward spirals. There have been many different versions of the ladder of inference, and most of them have more rungs than that. I chose that version because it's the simplest and it's enough to make the point that's useful. The second model I want to look at is of double loop learning. So let's start with imagine that you're doing an evaluation, or doing anything for that matter, but doing evaluation is relevant to this evening's talk. And if you're doing it by following a recipe, your attention is on the recipe and taking each of the steps, step 1, step 2, step 3, that you think is expected of you. And in that case, the actions become routine. Much of what we do consists of routinized actions. If you drive a car or a bicycle or a motorbike or some other piece of transport, you're paying attention to the overall direction in which you're moving, probably, and you're probably trying to avoid the other vehicles and pedestrians that might be in your way. But much of how you do that, I suspect you don't pay conscious attention to. So what's happened is that there's no learning about how to make the actions fit the situation, the outcomes better. There's learning about the actions maybe, but not about the link between actions and outcomes. So that's where we get to single loop learning, where we pay attention to the outcomes too as we act. And then that provides us with feedback about whether our actions are achieving the outcomes that they're supposed to. And if they're not, we can alter the actions. And for most of us, most of the time, that's where we stop, because it turns out that going to double loop learning is quite a challenge. But that's when it becomes really useful, I think. Because we have a whole set of assumptions about how the world works and about what's correct behavior, about how we ought to behave towards some people. In most organizations, we fill an organizational role and there's some expectation that we'll behave in accordance with that role. And so often the assumptions, our theory of action assumptions, are set in concrete and taken for granted. And some of the organizations I've worked in expect that of us. I've been lucky enough that after some early stuff, I worked as an electrical apprentice for many years, and most of the tradespeople I worked with didn't tell me in detail how to do something. If they thought I could do it, they would tell me what the task outcomes were supposed to be and then leave me to get on with it. And that was really good for my learning. And then when I became an electrical draftsperson, that was even truer, and I was given enormous freedom, and I was lucky to have a lot of freedom. And I was even free, for that matter, to change my mind about how to approach a drafting task. And I had the kind of boss who would let me do that if it produced the outcomes, and particularly if it was even better at producing the outcomes. So that's double loop learning, and I find it very valuable. And let me look at just one more tool before I turn things back to Titos. A little anecdote to illustrate the point. One of my friends and colleagues, whom I've never met face to face, but I met him on virtually. He's an Israeli. He lives near the West Bank in Israel, so that he can do relationship building work between the Israelis and the Arabs. And that will give you some kind of idea of what kind of person he was. And his name is Victor Friedman, and he's done some writing in the field of action research. And I mentioned to Victor that another mentee of Argyris had noticed that Argyris generated a lot of defensiveness in the clients that he worked with. And Victor said, oh, Argyris didn't mind arousing people's defensiveness. He enjoyed using his skills to overcome the defensiveness. Well, I don't have the skills to do that, so I wouldn't try to do that. And most other people don't have those skills either. And that may be another reason why I think Argyris's work is undervalued. So let's have a look at what Diana McLean-Smith did about that. She had access to the tape recordings that Argyris made of most of his work with his clients. And she wondered if he wasn't, if he didn't follow his own principles to the extent that he said he did. So she analysed what he did, and she found out that in fact he does practice what he preached, almost completely. And she set out how to achieve the same outcomes without raising defensiveness. And the tool she used to do that is called interaction mapping. Remember on your screen the two diagrammed faces, and for each of them there are assumptions about motives driving their actions, which drove other people's assumptions about the other person's motives. She would sketch that out on a large piece of chart paper or butcher paper, looking something like that, labelled A's assumptions, A's actions, B's assumptions, B's actions. She would set the two people in conflict. Now, she must have done some prior work on building relationships, or this wouldn't have worked. But they would be seated side by side on the table. When I use interaction mapping, I invite them to think of the two people not as themselves, but as A and B, because that helps them to maintain some distance from what they're doing, and that makes it easier for them to agree. And so her task for them was to agree on what fitted in each of the four boxes, and then to agree on what they would like to do about that. And so that's interaction mapping as the third tool. And I'll leave it there to give us as much room for questions as we can. And so I'll stop sharing If I can find the right button. There it is. And I'll get out of PowerPoint and turn it back to Titos. So Titos, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Bob, for putting us in, giving us a little bit of stress to be able to move us forward in terms of our discussion. I think there's, we started out with a lot of with a lot of what needs to change in terms of our own perspectives and what we need to understand about our own natures and our own persons and personalities to get us to be more adaptive to change. But with that, I'll leave it to everybody in the chat to, open up the questioning and reflection. Again, you can either choose to unmute yourself or put it on the chat. Put your questions on the chat.
Hi,
Hi,
Titos.
nah,
Hi, Bob. Would it be okay if I start us off? This is Gio Cornby from the Philippines.
Hello, Gio. Yes, please.
Bob, thank you. That was so wonderful, so insightful. I love the prodding on untested assumptions. And I can tell you've thought about this a lot, and I'm interested on your opinion on how we go from the downward cycle of untested assumptions that we're at now and the systems that are at play and how we can start shifting it upward.
Thanks, Gio. I think the key point, as I mentioned when I talked about Diana McLean Ross, is some prior work on relationships. This was a hard lesson for me to learn. I used to be able to say that I'm the most introverted person I know, and I think that was the truth. We get less introverted as we age, and so I've become a little more extroverted than I used to be. And I think one of my grandkids is now probably more introverted than I am. But then I found out that when relationships are good, everything else becomes easy. And building relationships is really about being present for other people, being real, not acting within a professional role, preferably, but bringing as much of ourselves to our behavior and the relationship as we're able to. Because when people see us as real people, we are hardwired to be considerate of one another. And if we can establish that as a starting point, then we have a chance, for instance, to sit people down side by side at a table with Diana McLean Ross's chart in front of them and ask them to think of themselves as A and B and to agree on what they want to fit in the 4 boxes. So that would be my suggestion. So to what extent does that answer your question?
Thank you. That was perfect.
Thanks, Gio. Any other? Les?
oh, I would like to say thank you very much, Doctor, because it's been really inspiring. It is insightful because I have had a feeling that during my work, 24 years in this NGO, doing a number of projects, but the one that has been consistently since 2000 thus far, with great achievements, with a collection of weaving, with documentation, and somehow these evaluations from the donors, although they say, oh, the project is good, it's really successful, but then the evaluation comes, the result is very mixed. So I'm very confused and they keep donating because they say that progress is successful, but when they do the monitoring and evaluation, it doesn't match. And we decided to apply for APEA, small funding, to start our own, to create a new system of evaluation of the work that we have been doing for more than 2 decades in order to find its substantial impact. We know it has impact. We have accumulated documentation. We have also gathered a huge collection of traditional weaving, of art, other crafts. Our crafts goes all over the world for exhibitions, but the conventional, uh, pardon me if I call it like this, because I don't know what name to give it, evaluation processes that we have been through from one donor to the other, they don't match, they don't click. And we are using, of course, the tools that we have learned that were useful, and some tools that you gave just now to see how we go. And then we'll report to APEA as we go. Probably we will find our own evaluation system that really gives us some insight into the importance or the impact of what we are doing and how the communities receive it. We know that it has been always a trial and error learning, but we have learned a lot through our own efforts, which are said or considered okay, beautiful, but the evaluation is always a mix-up. It doesn't. So sorry for that. Another thing, can you share the material you just put on the screen or not?
Yes, I can do that. Not immediately, because I need to tidy up the slide deck a little bit.
Thank you. But it's okay later on, no problem.
So it'll be within a couple of days, and I think as this session is being recorded, the recording will be available too in a little while. What you're describing sounds extremely exciting, actually, and I hope you managed to make it sufficiently enjoyable for you and the people you're working with, because I think
actually,
that improves the likelihood of success. The other thing that it seems to me that with craft as a background, what a beautiful starting point that is, because craftsmen don't follow a recipe. They have the recipe in their head and in their fingers, and they vary that depending on, for instance, if they're operating a loom, they take into account the qualities of the particular loom and the qualities of the thread that they have, because that changes how they apply the recipe. Or to use the metaphor that Titos attributed to me earlier, to approach craft, and for that matter, just about everything else in our life, as chefs and not as cooks. And so to be aware of what's happening around us and to respond to that. And craft seems to me like a marvelous starting point for that. So I
Bob, I think you're muted. Sorry.
Oh, how did that happen? Sometimes my computer seems to have a mind of its own.
They do, don't they? Yeah, that's why I don't like touching them. But anyway, thanks you and thanks,
So
Bob.
what I was saying at the end is that what a marvelous starting point craft is, and I was predicting that you would have fun and be successful. Thank you for the question.
Any other impressions or questions?
Hello,
Reflections?
Bob.
Yes,
Thank
Sylvie.
you so much for sharing this very innovative and insightful, tools. Actually, I have come upon this Agris and Son work when I was working with a teacher's transformation project, helping them to get into a reflective learning. That is also a method, reflective learning. And a lot of time, all these tools are wonderful because I've implemented it myself. But the learning, the experience is, I think people need a safe space. There need to be safe learning space for people to be able to, um, talk about what they disagree with, or maybe challenge thinking or challenge some assumption. But a lot of times I find that even within a community, the safe space is not there, and the power dynamics needs to be considered, because if you put everybody in the room, those people with more power, they will have more to say, and they'll make the decision, especially the decision maker. And as evaluators, we're also in a very difficult position, because sometimes you know sometimes we have to yield uh, to the piper, because they are the one paying the for commissioning the evaluation and so on. And it is actually, as I put all these, because I've used the ladder of inference and also the double loop learning before, as I put this into practice, I find that it is actually very challenging to make it work, especially as evaluators, because we come in and there's no opportunity for us to build that relationship. And because of that, because we don't have that relationship building beforehand, therefore it doesn't work so well. No, and but as a program designer or program implementer, I think there will be more opportunities for people to use these tools. And having said that, for evaluation, I think a lot of evaluation is done as an afterthought instead of built in at program design stage. And as a result, some of the donor will say, "Oh, you're doing a great job," and all this, but the evaluator is saying the other thing, another thing, because actually at evaluation stage there shouldn't be any surprises, because at the program planning stage, when you are already planning the program, you are already considering how you're going to measure your success, or how you're going to measure the change that you intend to implement. So instead, and you will be collecting the monitoring data collectively, progressively towards the end, instead of the evaluator coming in and giving you a surprise. So I think that's the the I mean the learning that I've had based on my own experience implementing these tools. And trust me, it's not easy to engage with program implementers that do not like the result of the evaluation. They'll deny it, and it will take a long time to conclude the evaluation and to get paid. I've been in evaluation that say, okay, it will take 4 months, but then it drags on and on to about 2 years, because of all these tension with the results of the evaluation. Yeah, that's all I would like to share from my own experience.
Thanks, Sylvia, and I agree with you a lot about the importance of creating a safe space. And part of my reason for stressing the importance of relationship is the better the relationships are, the safer the space is for the people who have those relationships. If there is a big difference in the power that people have amongst the participants, I ask people, are they willing, when we're working together on the evaluation or whatever the consultancy is, are they willing to leave their rank outside the door and bring themselves as fully engaged human beings into the task, and see if they're willing to do that? And that helps a lot too. The relationship between you and the person paying the bills, I agree that's important. And I think that one of the important lessons that cost me some problems early in my career was to learn the importance of the contracting phase before the work even begins. And one of the things I now say to anybody who asks me to do some work, if it seems that there's enough there to make it worthwhile for me and for them, I will say something like this. I will say, I think we're in general agreement. I do need to say that I need freedom to respond to whatever happens in the moment, on the day, with the people. And if I don't have that freedom to act, I can't do what you're asking me to do, and I'm not the right person for this job. I think you need to find somebody else. I need the freedom to change my mind, to respond to what's happening in the moment. And so I make that part of my contracting. And I usually don't charge a fee for the contracting phase, because people don't like paying money until what they think of as the real work actually starts. And so I find not charging for the entering and contracting phase makes it a little easier to really engage people more honestly in doing that. Let me also say something about measurement. I don't think that putting numbers on things matters. Most of the work that I do isn't done with numbers. I was trained as an experimental psychologist, and I learned more about statistics than I did about people in my undergrad degree in psychology. And so I think numbers are fine if they will do the job, but for most of the work I do, they're inappropriate. And that's why I limit my evaluation work to formative evaluation, asking, how can we build in the feedback mechanisms so that we can keep on improving, rather than answer the question about how did we do, how well did we do? And so maybe I'll leave it there. So thanks for the thanks for the information you provided and for the questions that were built into it. Interesting stuff.
Thanks for the reflection, Sylvia. And I can't help it, but I have to take off my moderator hat for a while and probably push push the conversation into some of the points that you were already making. It's interesting because Bob started us off with trying to take paradigm shifts into how we are thinking and what are the assumptions behind a lot of our work. But actually, uh, one thing that always challenges me is we can talk about safe space, we can talk about personal relationships, but we are always acting within the paradigms of organizations and that kind of outcome making. So maybe not as a question, not to put Bob in that question, because unfortunately I am an organizational development consultant myself. So this is probably the worst thing to say for me because I will never get contracts, right? But we all work with organizations. Are they the right places to actually be trying to foster these kinds of meaningful relationships? And maybe how do we push the envelope on this one, and how we rethink relationships, as they necessarily always organizational? So I don't know, Bob, whether you want to get in on that. I see you're already smiling.
It seems to me that most of our particularly larger organisations are unfit for purpose and will become even less fit for purpose if the world does become more turbulent. And the interesting thing is that there are hundreds and maybe even thousands of organisations, mostly small to medium, but some larger ones, that have become much less hierarchical, and their profitability goes up and the enjoyment and motivation of their people goes up, and nobody copies them because it seems like a leap too far for most organisations. And so somehow we have to engineer, it seems to me, a genuine paradigm shift and make it more acceptable to trust people more and to devolve more genuine responsibility to the workplace and near to the workplace, and to have teams that don't consist of really a set of peer relationships with the team leader, but teams who function as a genuine, good relationship team. And I think we're well short of that in most of the organisations of today. So I think that's in agreement with what you've just said.
Yeah, and I would take that as a challenge to each and every one of us. I think still working in organizations or working as externals to organizations to keep on trying to challenge that kind of paradigm. I would like one last call for like last reflections and questions, if you will, before Randy kills me for bad time management. That's it. So yes, so back to my role as herding everyone, my organizational role to herding everyone towards the center of the screen. If everyone can please turn on their cameras so we can have a documentation of this conversation and who was on it.
Okay. Please
Yes.
open your camera. We have two pages right now. And page one. Page two. Thank you.
So thank you everyone for indulging us and taking a photo. So again, thank you, Bob, and thank you everyone. And let me just get a summary and closing remarks from Tamak Takar, please.
Yeah, thanks. Am I audible, Titos? Okay. Thank you, Titos, and thank you very much for Bob and Ritu. I mean, especially Bob for such thoughtful and timely presentation, and something that I learned very new today. These methods, and I think the key highlight from today's session is that it reminds us that maintain evaluations relevance in a turbulent future is not only about improving methods, but it's about understanding people, relationships, assumptions, and the way we respond to difficult situations. Uh, in that one thing that I took from this presentation is that turbulence, uncertainty, or the difficult situation affected people in different manner, mostly deeply, because we are used to have make it simple always. And in research and evaluation, this is very important. Because we do not always see reality as it is, and we often filter our information, interpret through our own context, and then act based on that interpretation. Uh, and we select some information, attach meaning to it, make assumptions, and then decided what actions can take. Therefore, it's as evaluators, we need to be careful about how we interpret situations, especially in complex and stressful contexts. Bob also highlighted that when people are under stress and embarrassment, their behavior may change. Though we think that we are considering that what we believe in the things, but we try to control the process, defend our position, and act in ways that that not match with our belief that we believe the things. And this is very like relevant to evaluation research, because evaluations mostly this happen in very sensitive context. So because of that, people may feel judged, marginalized, and maybe not maybe cushion. So we have to pay attention on not only data and findings, but also trust, safety, and relationships. And also, one key thing that I learned about assumptions, because usually we come from assumptions based on our perspective again, and uh, uh, it's sometimes it's based on our actions, our experiences, but we have to think about the real scenario on the assumptions, and then see the people, and see the communities, and see the scenario and the context, and then come up with our assumptions. So Bob has in the discussion has brought a few tools: ladder of inference, double loop learning, and interaction mapping. So personally, one thing I think I have taken that a very special one is this double loop learning, where we don't think only about we not only about the actions and results or outcomes, but we come back in the to the assumptions, and whether we check the assumptions are real, or whether we are in a we rethink the our assumptions. So these were the key messages that I have gotten through this webinar, and I think it has given us time to think, and how we should think about this difficult or context in a different manner. So, with that note, I would like to thank especially Bob for today's this wonderful presentation, and also Titos for the great moderation and keeping the time well, and also Ritu for the opening remarks and setting up the scenario, and all of our participant here for active participation with questions and with the reflections, and being here today with us for making this successful webinar, and also the APEA team, organizing committee, and all the partners for successfully organizing the webinar. Thank you, Titos. Over to you.
Thank you very much, everybody. And hopefully, our discussion has given us some more ingredients to become a little bit better chefs over the next, over our careers. But please, there will be another discussion, very interesting discussion on capacity and evidence-based policymaking on the 15th of July. And please, everybody, you can also join that. And then we also have, please also, scan the QR code and get your say on the Tokyo Call for Action on the institutionalization of evaluation. And yes, on that note, hopefully we are, continue this conversation in some other way or form. And please, thank you again, APEA, for having us and for, hosting this space, this very important space for us to think about very interesting things indeed. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you all.